For 40 minutes after my divorce, I sat on the floor in the middle of this room, and I could not get up. I wasn't sad in the way you cry. I wasn't angry in the way you yell. I was paralyzed. My legs felt like they were filled with concrete. My arms were just heavy things attached to my shoulders. The air was still, thick with the scent of old paper and dust that caught the afternoon light. And the room was so full of things, I felt like I was drowning in them. His favorite armchair with the permanent imprint of his body. The stack of newspapers he'd never read. A porcelain bird he'd bought on a trip we took. Every single object was a silent monument to a life that had ended, and I no longer knew what was mine and what was just the wreckage. It was the physical evidence of a shared story, and I was the only one left to read it. I felt pinned to the floor by the sheer weight of it all. I did all the things you're supposed to do. I went to the doctor, who nodded and wrote a prescription. I tried therapy, where I talked about my feelings for an hour every week. I tried meditation, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. I tried the gym, trying to sweat out the anxiety. And they all helped for a little while. They were like putting a small bandage on a wound that went down to the bone. But none of them solved it. None of them addressed the low-grade, constant exhaustion that was the first thing I felt when I woke up, and the last thing I felt before I fell asleep. Tell me in the comments, have you ever tried everything to feel better and still felt like something was missing? A simple yes or no is all I need to see. What finally worked started on an afternoon when I decided I couldn't live in this environment anymore, and I started letting go in a way I had never tried before. In this video, I'm going to tell you the method that saved me and why it worked when everything else failed. I started in the bedroom. I don't know why. It just felt like the place where the silence was the heaviest. The afternoon light was low, cutting long, dusty stripes across the carpet. I made a rule for myself. No music, no podcast, no television humming in the other room. Just me and the things. The air was so still, I could smell the old paper in the books on the nightstand, and the faint, dry scent of dust that clung to the curtains. I picked up a stack of magazines from the floor. They felt heavy, heavier than they should. I put them down. I opened a drawer filled with his old ties, coiled like sleeping snakes, and the scent of his cologne, faint but sharp, hit me like a physical blow. I closed it. My body felt stiff, my movements clumsy, as if I were wading through thick water. Every object I touched seemed to resist, to push back with its own history. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud. It was filled with the sound of my own shallow breathing and the frantic, unspoken question that grew with every failed attempt. Where do I even begin? My hand finally rested on a small, ornate clock on my nightstand. It was a wedding gift from 25 years ago. Heavy brass, that was always cold to the touch. It had never worked properly. We kept it because it was a gift, and that's what you did. As I held its dead weight in my hands, the silence in the room became absolute, and a familiar tightness bloomed in my chest. It was the same dull ache I used to get years ago, waiting for the sound of his key in the door long after midnight. It was a low-grade, constant tension I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. And then a thought rose up from the quiet, not as a whisper, but as a clear, cold fact. You spent half your life fixing things that were never meant to work. It wasn't an accusation. It felt like a diagnosis. In that moment, holding that broken clock, I finally understood this wasn't about cleaning a house. It was about excavating a life. A few weeks into this process, I went to visit my older sister, Eleanor. Her house always smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wool, a scent that clung to the heavy curtains and thick carpets. Every surface was covered, not with junk, but with what she called history. Porcelain dolls with vacant eyes stared from tiered shelves. Stacks of photo albums leaned against the legs of tables, and her mantelpiece was a crowded city of silver-framed faces. Eleanor's hands were never still. As we talked, they fluttered around her like nervous birds, straightening a doily by a millimeter, adjusting a frame that was already perfectly centered, picking an invisible piece of lint off a velvet pillow. At one point, she looked around the room, a soft, satisfied smile on her face, and said, "A full house is a blessed house. That's what Mama always said." In that moment, watching her hands endlessly manage her possessions, I saw it with a terrifying clarity. I wasn't looking at my sister. I was looking at a ghost. I was looking at the woman I would have become in 10 years if I hadn't picked up that broken clock. Leaving Eleanor's house that day, the cool air on my face felt like waking from a long, feverish dream. I drove home not with sadness for my sister, but with a quiet, fierce resolve for myself. For the first time, I saw with absolute clarity that all my previous attempts to feel better, the therapy, the medication, the gym, were just different versions of the same mistake. They were all forms of management. I was trying to manage my grief, manage my anxiety, manage a house full of objects that were actively managing me. The real path forward wasn't about finding a better system to control the old life. It was about having the courage to finally dismantle it, piece by painful piece, until I could hear my own voice again in the quiet. It wasn't about organization, it was about excavation. And through that slow, silent digging, I discovered a series of habits, a method that had nothing to do with cleaning and everything to do with healing. I'm going to share them with you now. The first habit wasn't about tidiness. It was about exhaustion. Every expert says to start with something small, an easy win, a junk drawer, a single shelf. My body, however, pulled me somewhere else entirely. It pulled me toward the formal dining room, a room we hadn't eaten in for a decade. It had become a silent, dusty museum for furniture inherited from relatives I barely knew. A heavy mahogany sideboard, a set of 8 chairs that no one ever sat in. Just walking past the doorway made me feel tired. A physical weight would press down on my shoulders, and I'd find a reason to turn around. My mind said, "Start in the kitchen." But a deeper, quieter voice, the one I was just learning to hear again, said, "Go where it hurts the most." So I did. I walked in, closed the door, and just stood there in the weak afternoon light, breathing in the smell of old wood and forgotten years. That room was the source of the drain. I knew it instantly. It wasn't the clutter. It was the history it was forcing me to carry. Every piece of dark, heavy furniture was a monument to an obligation I had accepted without question. Before I touched a single thing, I started the second habit, something from my old life as an accountant. I took out a simple spiral notebook and a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote the date, then one sentence. Entering the dining room, feeling heavy, anxious, like I'm in someone else's house. Then I worked for an hour. I didn't accomplish much. I just moved one chair out of the room. But when the hour was up, I sat down and wrote again. Leaving the dining room, feeling tired but clearer, a little lighter. Your feelings are data. Seeing the words in black ink week after week became the objective proof I needed on days when it felt like I was making no progress at all. Have you ever noticed that certain rooms in your house make you feel more tired than others for no obvious reason? Tell me which one in the comments. The next rule I made was the hardest, but the most important. At first, I tried to work with the radio on, listening to music to keep my spirits up. But I found myself just shuffling piles from one surface to another, a busy kind of procrastination. It was motion, not progress. So one Saturday, I tried something different. I turned everything off: the television, the radio, my phone. I walked into the bedroom, and the silence was so absolute, it felt like a pressure in my ears. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the whisper of my clothes as I moved, the sharp, shallow sound of my own breathing. Every object I picked up seemed to have its own frequency in that quiet. The scrape of a cardboard box on the wooden floor was a gunshot. The clink of a glass perfume bottle against a ceramic dish was an alarm bell. I wanted to run. I wanted to fill the air with noise, but I forced myself to stay. It was in that quiet that the real work began. Distraction is a form of anesthetic. It lets you perform the surgery without feeling the cut. But I needed to feel it. In the silence, I picked up a wool sweater he'd left behind. Without a song to distract me, I could smell the faint, lingering scent of his cologne. I could feel the weight of it in my hands. And I could finally feel the grief associated with it. Not a vague sadness, but a sharp, specific ache. The silence didn't create the pain. It simply allowed me to hear what was already there. I learned you have to be present to the wound to clean it properly. You have to sit with a thing and let it tell you its story. And then you have to decide, without any other voice in your ear, if that story is still yours to carry. This was the hardest part for me. If you've ever tried to just be silent in your own home, tell me what that felt like. This kind of emotional excavation is draining. After an hour or two, I would feel hollowed out, as if I'd run a marathon. I quickly realized I couldn't heal in the very environment that was making me sick. I needed a sanctuary, a place to retreat that was already whole. So my next habit wasn't about removing things, but about creating one small, clear space. I chose an armchair in the corner of the living room. I took everything off it and around it. I cleared a small end table beside it, placing only a lamp and a single book on its surface. That was it. That corner became my recovery zone. When the silence in the bedroom got too loud, or the weight of a memory became too much, I would go to that chair. I could sink into it and look in one direction and not see a single project, a single pile, a single thing that asked something of me. It was an island of peace, and I organized the entire rest of the house from that one small anchor of calm. There were things, however, that I simply couldn't decide on. One afternoon, I found a box of photographs from the early years of our marriage. Me, 25 years old, smiling a smile I barely recognized. Him, looking at me in a way I had long forgotten. My plan was to sort them into two piles, keep and discard. But when I picked up the first picture, my hand started to tremble. A wave of something, not sadness, not anger, but a profound and complicated grief washed over me, and it was so strong I felt dizzy. My first thought was, I'm failing at this. I'm not strong enough to let go. I tried to force it, to just push through the feeling, but it was like trying to push through a solid wall. My own body was telling me to stop, that this was a wound I wasn't ready to touch yet. Forcing a decision before you're ready is just another form of violence against yourself. So I created a new kind of category, one that acknowledged the reality of my feelings. I found a simple, clean cardboard box, and with a thick black marker, I wrote on the side in my clearest handwriting, "Still processing." Then I gently placed the box of photographs inside it. Putting them in there wasn't an act of procrastination or failure. It was an act of respect. It was me telling myself, this is too much for today, and that is okay. The story isn't over. The conversation is still happening. I put the box in a clean, accessible closet. I wasn't hiding it. I was giving it a quiet place to rest until I was ready to talk to it again. I learned that letting go isn't a purge, it's a conversation. And you have to honor the fact that some conversations take much longer than others. You can't rush a goodbye that took a lifetime to arrive. This next habit started months later, when the house was finally starting to breathe again. The light felt different. The air moved more freely. But a new anxiety began to creep in, the fear of it all coming back, the fear of the clutter returning inch by inch until I was drowning again. One day, I bought a new lamp. It was beautiful, simple, and I loved it. But as I stood at my front door, holding the box, I felt that old, familiar tightness in my chest. My first instinct was to just put it down in the corner of the dining room, the old dumping ground, and deal with it later. But I stopped myself. I could feel the old pattern trying to reassert itself, the slow creep of later that had buried me before. I knew if I let that one box land there, another would soon join it. Maintaining clarity, I realized, wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily practice. Standing there at the threshold of my own home, I made a new rule. It was simple, and it was absolute. For anything new to come into this house, something of equal size and presence had to leave. Before the new lamp could find a home, an old one had to be packed in a box for donation. It wasn't about deprivation or a rigid minimalism. It was about intention. It was a way of forcing myself to be a conscious gatekeeper of my own peace. The habit became a small, silent ritual at the front door. A pause, a question. What is leaving to make space for this? It transformed my relationship with consumption. I no longer bought things to manage a feeling. I only brought things in that actively supported the life I was building. A clear home, I discovered, is not an empty home. It is an intentional one. The final habit was less of a rule and more of a shift in perception. I used to see my home as a container for my life, a passive backdrop to the real story. After this journey, I understood the truth. The house was never passive. It was an active participant. It was a physical record of my decisions, my fears, my deferred hopes, and my silences. Every cluttered surface was a conversation I had refused to have. Every broken object I kept was a promise I had made to fix something that was never meant to work. Changing my home wasn't about aesthetics. It was about changing my life from the outside in. It was about creating an environment that reflected not the woman I had been, but the woman I was determined to become. You don't just get rid of an object. You get rid of the job it makes you do. The dusting, the moving, the worrying, the remembering. Every single time you look at it, you get your energy back. For years, I believed my home was just a container, a passive backdrop for the real story that was happening inside my head. But that was the biggest lie of all. Your home is never passive. It is an active participant in your life, and it is talking to you every single second of every single day. Every pile of unopened mail is a conversation you're avoiding. Every object you inherited and secretly hate is a silent obligation you're still honoring. We spend so much energy trying to fix our minds from the inside out, trying to think our way to peace. But the exhaustion isn't just in your head, it's in your house. When you finally let go of an object, you're not just getting rid of a thing, you are getting rid of the job it forced on you, the job of dusting it, moving it, worrying about it, and remembering. You're not just clearing a shelf, you are firing 1,000 tiny employees that were draining your life, one glance at a time. You've been listening to my story. Now let's talk about yours. If you are tired in your bones and you don't know why, if you've tried everything and you still feel that low, constant hum of anxiety under your skin, I want you to look around you right now. Look at the room you are in, that chair, that pile of mail, that thing you bought 5 years ago that you keep meaning to use. They are not just sitting there. They are participating in how you feel. Your environment is talking to you every second of the day. The question is, are you listening? You have more power over your mental state than you think you do. But it doesn't start in your head with more thinking. It starts with your hands. So here is my challenge to you. After this video ends, don't just think about it. Pick one drawer, not a room, not a closet, one single drawer that you know is a mess. Open it, take everything out, and do it in silence. Just for 10 minutes. That's your start. I'm sitting here now in this living room, holding a simple cup of tea. The warmth seeps into my hands. This is the exact spot on the floor where I sat for 40 minutes, unable to move, pinned down by the weight of everything. That day, the room was screaming with the past. Today, all I hear is the quiet. It's not an empty quiet, it's a peaceful one. This room is finally mine. And you deserve this feeling too. You deserve to feel at peace in your own home. You deserve a place that restores you, not one that drains you every time you walk into it. So please, stop managing a life that isn't working. Start building one that does. And if this story felt true to you, if it felt like I was speaking directly to your heart, please share it with one person you know who is carrying too much. Because sometimes the permission to finally let go has to come from the outside.